If you guys all could just hit continue. Great, thank you, Jessica. Okay, board members, the time is 12:02, and so we will start the study session of the State Board of Education. I will do a roll call just so we know who's present at this meeting today. For board members who are not present, board staff will send them the recording of this study session and board orientation refresher this weekend. So starting President Narducci, Vice President Kaur.
I'm here.
Superintendent Hoffman. Member Baker.
Here.
Member Broussard.
I'm here.
Member Burton.
Here.
Member Kay. Dr. Mack. Dr. Robbins. Member Ruiz.
Present.
Member Wellborn. Great. Thank you very much. So we have on the record who was present for today's study session. So really fun, interesting topic that we will always see at the State Board of Education, and that's state accountability, right? So before we get started today, obviously, I just want to set the goal for this study session. And the goal is to really understand the state's accountability system by the end of today's meeting. We have 90 minutes, so feel free to discuss or ask questions. But what we want to do is just establish that foundation prior to the board seeing a ton of accountability agenda items this fall and winter. Next slide, Jessica. Just so all the board members know, we do have Wendy Davey from the department's accountability unit on the call today, so she can answer any kind of data questions or more in-depth questions of the accountability system. I will be talking about the A through F history, current models. We can have time for discussion, and then we'll also address some future items that the board will see in the fall, focusing specifically on the 21-22 school year accountability system and the 5-year accountability plan that we hope to bring to you this fall. Next slide, Jessica. So a little bit of background about the accountability system. ARS 15241 charges the department and final adoption to the state board to develop an A through F profile. Right now, we have systems in place for K-8, 9-12, hybrid. So again, hybrid are those schools that could be K-12, or maybe they're 7-12, or any other kind of makeup. We have an alternative school model. And right now we're in the process of AOI modeling. So we will have an AOI accountability plan shortly. Later on, when we start talking about the 5-year accountability plan, as you can see, we're also charged with establishing a local education agency plan, a K-2 plan, and a small schools plan. And so from about 2016 to current, the board, we've been working so much on the traditional and the alt and the AOI, we haven't gotten to the other aspects of 15241 yet. So we need to build within our 5-year accountability plan, accountability systems for, again, those LEAs, the K-2 and the small schools. Go ahead, Jessica, next slide. All right. So general background on A through F, Member Baker and Member Mack were the longest serving board members since 16. When we established the ad hoc, I was a deputy director at the time. We had a bunch of meetings in a short period of time. And then the majority of all of you on the call and also not on the call came onto the board in about the summer of 2017. Our current school letter grades that we have right now are the 18-19 letter grades. And that's because we had a hiatus in 19 and 20 because of the school closure bills, and we canceled the statewide assessments. We carried forward the 18-19 letter grades, and that's due to COVID. For the 2021 school year, we have the state legislator and state legislation placed A through F letter grades on a 1-year pause. So we're still currently, if you go to a school district's or a school's website, you're going to see the 18-19 letter grades. What has happened is that we've seen changes through the accountability system when we've had data issues, right? So if you look at the 18-19 school year, we had menu of assessments. And later on in the presentation, I'll talk about how the board adjusted the 9-12 growth measure to take into consideration the menu of assessments. So for this year, for the 21-22 school year, unless there's another law change, schools will have letter grades for the 21-22 school year, but it's also the first year of the new statewide assessment. Therefore, it's imperative that the board cements a system for this school year sooner rather than later. So hence why we're going to be doing a lot of work this fall and this winter on making those small adjustments due to data, and then also developing the consistency of an accountability system within a 5-year accountability plan so that schools know, what's going on from school year 22-23 on. Next slide, Jessica. Okay. This is just a reminder to the board. You all have placed subject matter experts within the TACs. So we have an alternative TAC, we have the accountability TAC, and we have an AOI TAC. And they all work together to review modeling and policy shifts that are requested by the board. And they are to provide recommendations along with the department to the board on how the accountability system should change in Arizona. So I'm going to stop there. Any questions with some of the history or the background? Great. All right, current models. So this is the current K-8 traditional model. We have the models, but we find that certain board meetings we formalize and approve the models against. The last time the K-12 model was approved was at the February 24th, 2020 board meeting. Now, when we look at the K-8 traditional model, and if you recall, I spoke about the different ATACs we had an ad hoc for accountability back in 16 and 17. The board members themselves at the time and still current really stressed growth within the K-8 traditional model. So you can see in here, growth is 50% of the K-8 traditional model. And when you, I'll get to the next slide in a second. The other areas, when the board initially adopted the K-8 model, really focused on the ESSA requirements as well. So you had some requirements for EL, you had some requirements for proficiency, and then there were some mathematical equations that you couldn't go over within your statewide accountability plan. But growth was the biggest, talked about all the time at the board level, at the different ad hocs and TAC. Growth for K-8 is very, very important to the state of Arizona. Next slide, Jessica. Okay, so we're looking at just the proficiency and growth. Proficiency is at 30% total of the K-8 accountability system. Growth is at 50%, okay? Just a reminder, the AZM2 was the old statewide assessment, and that's going to be replaced in the 21-22 school year with the AASA. That's the name of the new assessment. For proficiency, for that 30%, we're going to be using ELA and math assessments. And growth, 50%. 25% of that 50% within growth is from student growth percentiles, or SGP. 25% is from student growth to target, or SGT. Now, as a reminder, the board had a lot of conversations, and Member Baker, you can back me up on this, a lot of conversations about the 50% growth, because the board wanted to ensure that schools had accessibility to the higher letter grades so that all schools had the opportunity to be an A school. And what we see with the 3 years of data that we have in the accountability system, there are schools that have tremendous growth, and maybe their proficiency is not great, but they are A schools. So it is hitting what the board originally wanted with having growth at 50% of the K-8 model. Questions on proficiency or growth? I feel like I haven't presented to you guys in so long. Oh man. Okay. Next slide, Jessica.
I've got a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead, Armando. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go back, Jessica.
Yeah, you know, I was trying to measure my understanding of a concept based upon whether I could explain it to people who are not experts in this area. And so I was going like, okay, if I had to get up in front of a group of parents, I got English speakers, Spanish speakers, or maybe, you know, I don't know, some other language. And I've got to explain SGPs. This is the one that's always kind of like cracked my head, if you will. And I'm going to take a 30-second stab at it and see if I totally mess it up. And so student growth percentiles are if you test 1 year and you're in a percentile band, if you will, and you're now going to be tested, or you're in that band for the next year's assessment, and based upon you compared to that band of students is your growth.
Wendy, would you like to answer?
Where am I lacking?
Member Ruiz?
Thank you, Alicia. Member Ruiz, you're very close. You're compared to the cohorts that had scored similarly to you and how you did in comparison to your peers. I think that was an excellent, very brief discussion for a general population.
Okay.
Armando, it sounds like you just got an A-.
Okay. Now, don't ask me to explain it in Spanish because it might be a C, okay?
Any other questions pertaining to proficiency and growth? Great. All right, moving on to English language learners. These are English language learners is 10% within the accountability model for K-8, split 5% for proficiency, 5% for growth. This one's pretty straightforward. If there are no questions, I'll just move on to acceleration readiness. Okay, Jessica, go ahead. So acceleration readiness is a large bucket in which schools have multiple ways or have a menu of receiving points within this indicator. It's 10% of the whole K-8 model. And when the board initially established the acceleration readiness, two things. One, we wanted something to kind of mirror the CCRI on the high school side. The second area that the board considered was that you'll notice that a lot of these indicators match with either policy, like state law, right? Like we have a move on when reading law. We have chronic absenteeism, right? We have the, tardiness and 10%, right? True. I lost it, I'll come back to it. All the other ones have shown through research that if a student can be successful within 8th grade math, within reading, coming to school, special education students are included in general education, and the improvement of subgroups, that's going to lead to more success later in life and more success in later education years. So we measure it. I think Member Baker says this all the time. What are we incentivizing, right? And how can we get students to meet those? I will state, if you notice the 8th grade math, this was an area that has been adjusted in the past due to the removal of the end of course assessments. So originally 8th grade students would take the end of course assessment that tied to the class that they were taking in 8th grade. And once we removed the end of course assessments and moved to the new 10th grade assessment, the indicator changed slightly within the acceleration readiness bucket.
So I have a question.
Yes, Member Ruiz.
Yeah, if I remember this, it was easier to measure. I always used to share that if we teach algebra, at least algebra 1 by 8th grade, and we have a good percentage that would pass it, that would check this box. Is that like now that I read it, maybe it's different.
Member Ruiz, are you speaking of previously?
I'm kind of mixing two. A previous acceleration readiness was that you could measure, students who are proficient in upper math, if you will. And then now that I read it, it just says in upper math, I would have said algebra 1 or algebra 2 by 8th grade. But now that I read it, it says increases in highly proficient 8th grade math students, and then decreases minimally proficient. So it doesn't necessarily have the target as maybe algebra 1 or algebra 2 by the end of 8th grade. So then what is it?
And the reason for that, Member Ruiz, was because originally we had those end of course assessments for those students that were associated with the course that they were taking, right? So they had the algebra 1 end of course or the algebra 2 end of course. When we moved away from end of course assessments, the board had to establish a different way to measure this high school, this accelerated math within your 5th through 8th grade kiddos. So the board put in place, that 8th grade assessment. If they're highly proficient, but they're also decreasing the minimally proficient, they can be awarded points within this area to circumvent the issue that we don't have end of course assessments anymore. But we recognized that accelerated math is still very important for students. And again, what are we incentivizing? If it's important to students, how at the state can we incentivize more students having the opportunity to take higher levels of math courses? Wendy, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
And I think you summarized that really nicely, but we still wanted to encourage 8th grade as that benchmark. Being successful in 8th grade math is a real good indicator of being successful in high school math.
Great. Any other questions?
Just for a second.
Yes, Member Baker.
The other issue here, that looking at this category, what we were trying to do with this category was to make schools feel like they had a little bit of control over what they could do to get a better grade. And so frankly, the end of course tests and being able to monitor how many students in a middle school or elementary school had passed those tests was actually a really great acceleration measure, and it was really good at incentivizing schools to push kids forward in math. But we lost that, so this is the replacement for that. And I don't think it's as good, but it's certainly much better than nothing. And these are all things that schools can say, I don't want to just be a victim of the points that how well kids do on the test. I want to be able to do take some specific actions that's going to gain me some additional points and maybe bump me up to a little bit better grade.
Thank you, Member Baker. Okay, go ahead, Jessica, to bonus points. So here is another area that we've seen some changes. If you recall, before the accountability system was waived for the 1920 school year, we ran into the issue that AIM Science was being tested, right? But the feds came in and said, hey, you can waive AIM Science for your new assessment field test. And that was in grades 4, 8, and 11. So the board, we adjusted the science bonus points to be the percent tested on the field test. Now, because the 2021 school year, although there's not going to be a summative letter grade because of legislation, there still will be component scoring within the statewide report cards. So the data still will be uploaded into the report card site. There just won't be summative letter grades. Eventually, staff will recommend moving back to the proficiency aspect of the science bonus points. So the board may see that in the fall. Because we just changed science for that 1 year because of the field test. Any questions on the bonus points?
Alicia, I have a question
Yes, Member Burton.
about the AIM Science or the new science.
Yeah.
So will we then establish cut scores for the new science assessment so we can decide what proficiency means?
That's a great question. In terms of accountability, Wendy, I think we would have to set what the standard deviation is, because that's how we award the bonus points, correct?
Correct for accountability. Audra's team and the assessment team will be working with the science experts and doing that standard setting and proficiency setting. From there, then we will go back to how we calculated and give that modeling. Once we have, it was a field test, so we don't have scores to do it right now, but we can be able to model it in the future. But the assessment team will do all the appropriate standard setting to set that proficiency level.
So it's twofold, Member Burton. There's one part of cut scores with the assessment itself, and there's a second part with utilizing the data that comes from those cut scores and establishing the standard deviation to determine how to award the 3% of that bonus point.
So will this new assessment, is it given in, you said 4, 8, and 11?
Correct.
Okay. So there's really no way to measure growth because it's not given every year. Is that why I guess
That
what I'm getting at, and it's always just been something I've thought about with science, is I think there's potential to have tremendous growth in science. I think you can bring in some, that can become a focus of a school, and you can see tremendous growth, and we can capture it in proficiency. But I'm just thinking in schools that maybe never had a strong science department or had trouble getting a teacher, having incentive to, find that great teacher and have that great program. I'd love to see that somehow built in, but I think right now I can see the challenge of, because we, 4th, 8, and 11, it's hard to really capture that, but I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Member Burton, if my memory serves me correctly, and Wendy, you've been around for the ride as well, I would say that comparing, like if you're going to compare growth between 4th and 8th grade, that's probably not statistically sound. And I'm looking at Wendy because you have so many years in between the two metrics, right? But no, am I wrong?
Just one quick correction, Alicia. It's actually, they changed it to 5th grade and 8th grade.
Oh, I'm sorry, 5th grade. Yep.
But we're still looking at 6, 7, 3-year gap there and a lot of movement, possible movement.
However, you could do year over year. So the previous fourth grade to next year's fourth, you could look at those types of indicators. Sometimes the field does not like year over year looks because you do have a different cohort of students. And so as we know, 1 year your fifth graders might be out of this world, and next year, maybe they're even better, or they're different.
Can
Member
I ask?
Burton? Yes, Member
Sorry.
Broussard.
That's okay. I want to make sure Christine was done.
No, I am. That's helpful, Alicia. Thank you.
I was just looking at the special education enrollment because I thought you were going to go on to another slide, but that's schools with a percentage that's higher than the statewide average in special ed enrollment, correct?
Correct.
Okay, it just didn't say that on the slide, and I just wanted to make sure I understood it correctly.
Okay, go ahead, Jessica. All right, so we're moving to the 9-12 model. Okay, if you recall from the K-8, I spoke about how growth was really important, right, to the board. 9-12, the board spent a lot of time within the college and career readiness indicators. I would say it was the most important piece. It was the piece that we spent a lot of meetings on. Member Baker was instrumental in assisting with creating the CCRI, along with former board president Tim Carter, the Yavapai County School Superintendent. And again, it goes back to the understanding of what are we incentivizing? How are we ensuring that as a state, our high school graduates are leaving high school for college and or career, and they're prepared for either one or both of those. And then just a little side note, because I'm not sure if I've ever shared this with you all, but our college and career readiness index, when we established it in 16, 17, and we still occasionally get phone calls about it, even today, from other states across the nation. And we have seen what we've done in Arizona in other states' accountability systems in some form or fashion. So I think that's an applaud to the board and to the work that the field has done within in the department with the CCRI index. Next slide, Jessica. Okay. So for 9-12, we still see proficiency and growth. Proficiency is higher in 9-12. I know the same. So if 30% proficiency, again, you'll see the change within the statewide assessment. We're going to have ACT at the 11th grade, and we're going to have ACT Aspire at the 9th grade. And that will be an implementation for this school year, the 21-22 school year. We do see growth at 20%. And this is another area in which the board has made adjustments previously. We changed this indicator to subgroup improvement or subgroup performance, subgroup improvement for the 18-19 school year because of our issues we're having with the menu of assessments. And the reason I bring that up is because as the board looks at a 5-year accountability plan and meshes it with the 5-year accountability plan, the assessment and accountability plan, there will be periods within school years that the board will have to change certain indicators within the 9-12, and one of those will be growth. So the board will have to have conversations around, do we go back to subgroup performance for a year instead of growth? Do we kind of mash it together? What does that look like? Questions with proficiency and growth at the 9-12 level? Okay. All right, go ahead, next slide, Jessica. Here we see again the ELL indicator for 9-12. Jessica, next slide. We have high school graduation. Next slide, Jessica. In college and career readiness, there will be opportunities for the board to investigate the college and career readiness index to determine if they want to reset some of the point totals. And that's going to be a future board meeting. And whether it's this year, whether it's next year, the board is going to have to build it within their 5-year accountability plan. And the reason for that is because as we move through the education field, we may see that, this type of certificate should be awarded more points within the rubric, or we may have to make adjustments based upon our new assessment system within Arizona. And Wendy, I know your team has been doing a lot of work in the CCRI area. Is there anything you would like to share with the board on that?
Thank you, Alicia. We've been keeping track from some of the suggestions from the field, and we'll share them when that's ready to go, such as the seals that you can get on your diploma and some outdated placement tests that need to be replaced. So it's a little general cleanup as well.
Member Baker, is there anything you want to add to the college and career readiness indicator?
Just to say that I believe this is one of the most critical pieces of our accountability system. There's two things about it that are especially important. One is that it again puts a lot of control at the school level, so that it's tempting at the high school, so that schools feel like they can actually do things to earn points. It's tempting at the secondary level to say, well, we're getting kids that are 15, 16, 17 years old, and they're already 4 years behind, or they're missing these skills and we're stuck with them. The college and career readiness gives schools power to choose behavior that is going to increase points rather than looking just at test scores. And that was a big deal when we were developing this, to move away from only test score on the standardized test as the means to earning a grade. The second thing that is critically important about this is that it very specifically rewards schools for doing things that we know are good for kids. So, for example, you get points for having a lot of students complete the FAFSA. And every high school counselor will tell you, yeah, it's important you do the FAFSA, and principals know that, but there's 100 other demands on school time and energy. By actually giving it points, it just moves that issue up on the priority list. And we know that increasing FAFSA participation is going to increase college attendance, especially with low economic and minority students. So it's a powerful motivator. So it's giving control, a sense of control to the school, and incentivizing behavior that is good for kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Baker. Any other board members have questions, concerns?
I just want to echo what Cal said, Member Baker said about incentivizing schools and especially FAFSA completion. I sort of in my other work, I've seen that firsthand, and it's in a very positive way how schools become competitive on how many they can get to complete the FAFSA. So, and that's quite a change from even 5 years ago. So thank you for making those points.
This is Daniel. I just agree with my two colleagues wholeheartedly. We spend so much time and effort on FAFSA, and we see the light bulb go off when a student completes the FAFSA. Suddenly, they begin to view themselves as going to college, and you know, whether it's their local community college, a state university, or somewhere else. Boy, it's FAFSA all day, every day here in Yuma.
Thank you, Member Burton. Dr. Court. Okay, next slide, Jessica. All right, this is just reminding you the different hybrid type of modeling and schools that we have, and then how the hybrid is determined. Wendy, do you want to talk a little bit about the mathematical data behind hybrid?
Thank you, Alicia. It's actually, it keeps pretty simple. It's basically weighted on the number of enrollment that you would have in your base file so that the percentage would match. So if you have more kids in your K-8 model, the scores for that part would be weight a little bit heavier than they would for the 9-12.
Thanks, Wendy. Jessica, next slide, please.
I'm very glad Wendy has to do the math on that and not us.
Yes, I agree. Okay, so we also have the alternative model that's in place. It's very similar to the traditional model, so I'm not going to go into each individual indicator. But I did want the board to know that in some of the meetings that we've been having with the ATACs and Wendy, alternative schools did see enrollment drops last school year. And both our staffs and the TACs are working to determine the cause. And then we'll share with you if we can even determine the cause. And Wendy, if I'm correct, it's like the 19 to 21-year-olds we're seeing a significant decrease, correct?
Yes, according to our AA TAC members, a lot of these students that may have stayed in school were returning to work to help support families. That's the main emphasis or the main reason we're getting from our alternative groups as to why they saw a drop. But we will continue to have that conversation as they continue to follow up with their previous students.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, next slide, Jessica. So what does all this mean? And what do you need to know for the 21-22 accountability system? What we're doing currently is Wendy and her team, Jessica from the state board, Jessica Mueller, as you all know her, we're identifying any data issues within the 21-22 accountability system. The plan is to bring those data issues and recommended changes to the board for discussion and input, with final action happening this fall in order to adopt a plan for the 21-22 school year. And the reason for that, in which I preach at all the different TAC meetings, is that the board has to go forward with doing their job as it is in 15-241. If next session something happens and there's a bill and there's another year hiatus or whatnot, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But our job right now this fall and winter is to ensure that we have a 21-22 accountability system in place. And as someone who was working for the board in 16 and 17, I don't want to have, and Wendy, I'm sure you would agree, we don't want to have like every week having accountability meetings and Wendy's running data and bringing things to the board. So as staffers, we're really trying to give all the information for you all up front, plenty of time for discussion, and then putting in drop dead dates so that we know, okay, the December meeting, we need to make a decision so that the field knows this is what they're going to be graded on if and when we have an accountability system for the 21-22 school year. Wendy, do you want to go into any like just top level type adjustments that we're kind of foreseeing right now for the 21-22 school year?
We're getting the data right now in for the 2021 school year. We're going to be monitoring how the kids come back and what that looks like. I think pretty much holding steady as best we could and looking more for a long-term plan. We'll still have troubles with SGT because we have the new assessment that would be better held off until 23. We'll have to look at high school growth because we could do growth for 22, but we won't be able to do it in 23, but then we can do it again in 24. We could go back and review the August presentation we did last year. So those just off the top of my head are the main concerns that we would have. How we want to stay consistent, like on chronic absenteeism, just some of those points like we did last year in the same similar format, what the challenges would be and what possible suggestions we could bring forward.
And I think one of the other areas, and it's the third bullet point under areas of adjustment, is that how does the board want to measure those academic opportunities, if the board even wants to measure them, like gap closure or accelerated improvement due to COVID? Because it's not going to be, in my opinion, it's not going to be something that's like a 1 year and you're done. I think you're going to see something, if the board wants something that's over a couple different years, and we can build that within an accountability 5-year plan. But I know, Wendy, we've talked about that a lot at the ATAC meetings, and I know that there's been a lot of national conversation around accelerated improvement. And the board, we do have to establish a report for the governor's office by November 1st. So they kind of all tie together. And then there are opportunities, like Wendy said, we can look at CCRI, we can make those adjustments to the index. There are going to be opportunities where we have to kind of fiddle with growth because of the new assessment system. The field has consistently asked for a middle school model, right? Especially if you're serving 7-8 and only 7-8. So there are areas for us to go in and have in-depth conversations, but I do feel that it is important, like Wendy said, to provide consistency and to ensure that we have the structural integrity of the accountability system as it has been in place since 17.
Alicia, this is Daniel. Talk to me real quick about that report due to the governor on November 1st. What exactly are you asked to report on?
Sure. So we as the board, it's twofold. We're really working closely with the department because the department has a lot of the data and they're creating a lot of reports anyways for the field. So we're kind of just piggybacking off of them.
Sure.
And I'm thankful for Wendy for that. But it's understanding learning loss and any gaps. And then the board may provide recommendations to the governor's office on how to accelerate and how to close those gaps. The board will see the outline and the timeline and the big picture ideas at the August board meeting. And then we would go to formalize that at the October board meeting. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alicia?
Yes, Member Burton.
So at the August meeting, we will see sort of a taste of what this gap closure measurement may look like. Is that what you're saying? Or, because I'm very interested in that accelerated improvement, how gaps were closed during COVID, because I think it will give us some ideas of what interventions worked.
Sure. It may or may not be at August. I don't believe we've scheduled it for August, Wendy. It could potentially be September. But there, I think we have 4 agenda items just on accountability or accountability reports, agenda items that are associated with the executive order, agenda items that are associated with the letter grade hiatus from this past year and component scoring. We have business rules for the August board meeting. It's going to be very heavy. August, September, October is very heavy on accountability across all aspects of accountability. Member Baker.
Cal is fine for a study session. I just want to reemphasize a point that's been made before, and that is, as we look at the data, and actually it's to support what was just said by my fellow board member. And I hope that along with what is likely to be some negative data, that we also focus on success stories. The headlines are naturally going to go toward how many months students are behind and the terrible things that happen because of the pandemic. But I'm absolutely confident that there's a number of schools serving different kinds of populations who did really well last year. And so part of our responsibility is to force force the issue of the positive stories and make sure that those schools and the staff of those schools receive some recognition for standing out from the norm.
Thank you, Member Baker.
I've got an issue for on the future items.
Yes, Member Ruiz.
Yeah, I look at communities like ours and heavy immigrant population, kind of look at every few years seems like there's a different immigration policy, and that's not the issue. For us, we see influx in our communities of immigrants, and the main emphasis for really the first 3 years is just language acquisition. And when I look at the accountability and the measurements, third grade, we're measuring reading proficiency, and then we're measuring for K through 8's growth 50%, but at third grade, it's that first really assessment. And for schools that are having to deal with language acquisition, it seems to me like there's a disadvantage there. And the disadvantage is that language acquisition has to occur before reading occurs. And it seems like all we're doing is measuring reading. So with that policy of how that all schools have the ability to get an A, how does that fit? And I'm not sure it does. And I don't know if this is a question or I think it should be an item that's looked at. I was in a meeting yesterday with some business folks, and their emphasis was on the whole third grade reading, and I think sometimes a perception or misperception of failing schools. What's a failing school? What's a successful school? And I can understand, all the other elements of proficiency and growth for ELA, for math, especially past, once you're past third grade, fourth grade. But I'm not sure that third grade measurement is accurate, especially in communities that have high immigration, a population, and just the influx. I don't know who can answer that.
I'm not sure that there is an answer, but I appreciate your comments. And one of the things we spent a lot of time talking about, and when the system was being developed, is how can we make it possible for any school to get a high grade, even if they're dealing with a difficult population. And I think that desire to have that kind of system has not changed. And if there is something we can do to provide more opportunity for schools that are dealing with specific kinds of populations, I for one, am certainly willing to listen to that.
Yeah, the group that I was with yesterday talked about these 3-year cycles, and it seems like that's what we deal with. Is it seems like, okay, you work really hard, you got language acquisition, kids are starting to read, and then man, you got a whole new group of kids that come in. It's like you're starting all over again, and you just kind of see that cycle every. I don't know if it's related to election cycles or not, but it's like every 4 years, it's like you got an influx, and I can see it. I can see it coming. Live in the neighborhood. I see a change.
So Member Ruiz, Member Baker, what we can do is we can keep, I wrote down everything both of you said. I'll keep that in my mind, and Wendy, I'm sure you'll do the same. as we're looking at any potential additions or changes to really determine if there's any data that we can associate that with, right? Quantitative data to incorporate into the accountability system. So thank you for those two comments. Dr. Kaur, did you have anything you wanted to add? I saw that you unmuted yourself.
No, that's fine, Alicia. I was just going to say, I write down everything Cal and Armando say too.
Yes. Okay. Any other comments, questions, concerns before we adjourn the meeting?
Just want to say that this has really been helpful. I mean, I lived through all this stuff, but then there's a lot of other water that goes over the dams. So it's, and we look at little pieces of it every time we deal with a specific issue. And it was just really helpful to stand back and look at the whole thing in one sitting. So thank you for initiating this, and you did a great job of summarizing it. So thank you for doing that. And Wendy, thank you for your comments and expertise.
This is Daniel. Much the same. Alicia, Wendy, thank you so much. Very, very useful. I was only part of this, but it was great to summarize and refresh. Alicia, you referenced a couple of timelines of things when various pieces might be coming to the board. Certainly not today, it'd be unfair to ask you, but at some point, could you kind of map out when some of this stuff actually hits board agendas and board action?
Yes, Dr. Kaur, and we actually have those documents already prepared.
That's a mic drop moment for you right there. Very nice.
All right. Well, thank you, board members, for participating today. I really appreciate it. Like I said, this meeting has been recorded. I'll send it out this weekend. I'll send out basically it's like a scope of work, Dr. Kaur, that we have internally for all of us. I'll send that out, and utilize this recording if you need a refresher, or if you're watching it again and you need additional questions answered, feel free to reach out to myself and to Wendy. All right.